Okay, so we are now getting ready to get started. Thank you everybody for attending. My name, like I said again, my name is Marquise Holyfield, and you are now attending the what is your Golden Eagle Leader, what is my social identity. So today's workshop, I just want to go over a few things. So some of you are probably trying to figure out like what is social identities and how does that relate to leadership. Before I go through social identities, does anybody know what they are or know what a couple of them are off the bat before I go through them? No? Okay.
No.
Okay. So social identity is defined as the primary groups of identities, aspects of yourself where you belong to a particular group. So social identities are shaped by common history, shared experience, legal and historical decisions, and day-to-day interactions. So social identity starts from ethnicity, race, social economic, so basically class, gender, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, so are you American or another origin, first language, ability status, so do you have a disability or you do not have a disability, whether seen or unseen, age, and religion. Questions about the different social identities?
No questions.
Okay. Does any of this surprise anybody, or you see something that you didn't realize was part of a social identity?
First language is kind of surprising to me. I don't know, it's just something I didn't know.
Yeah. And usually it's first language because you have to think about, because our country is a melting pot, what is our national language?
English.
Okay, and some people who don't speak English in certain settings is looked frowned upon if you don't know how to speak English.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So, right. So it's just some things to think about. I know you said you didn't think about language overall, but yeah, it's key because it determines how people look at you and view you, even by the language that you use, whether you speak English or if you don't speak English. Okay. Any other things that surprised you? Anybody needed more clarification on?
No, it's clear.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back to the second question. How do you think they all relate to your leadership? How you lead to others?
How we interact with different people with those different social identities.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Anybody else?
Maybe your talents give you a social identity, like in leadership, your talents in various fields, maybe.
Okay.
I think it would impact how readily accepted you are as a leader.
Yes, for sure.
I think it would impact how we interact with the people that we are leading.
I think it's how well you understand other people's culture.
Right. That's what I was trying to say. Yes.
Yes, that is one of the things is going to be key. It also, as we start to talk about some of the other workshops, as we get a little further along, there's a couple of workshops called Power, Privilege, and Oppression. It also determines on where your power and your privilege is. So where do you stand up and advocate for other people when you clearly see things being done wrong? And where do you sit back and you don't do anything?
I'm gonna get it to fall. See, I with my pencil and now she wants to come.
Say it again. Okay.
Mom, why'd you start? Can you cover up your camera? I didn't know that you were starting.
1 second.
Hello?
My camera's not on.
Are you sure? Yeah. Just cover it up with your hand.
See?
Hey, turn off your
All right,
microphone.
give me 1 second. Let me mute.
Mute your microphone, lady.
Looks like. Okay. I'm going to ask everybody to mute yourself, and then when you want to speak, you can unmute yourself. How about that?
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Perfect. Okay. So let's move on a little bit. So as we talk a little bit about our social identities and how it helps us to lead, one of the things I also want us to think about as we lead as with our social identities, that how do we represent and how we are able to help others, how we're able to understand the people that we lead, how do we advocate and support them, how do we help to solve conflict. I know you guys did some conflict resolutions pieces with Jordan and thinking about some of the things that come into play with that. And so your social identity has an impact on that as well. So a good example of that is when we think about how we lead. So many of you have probably heard the saying or heard the facetious piece about how we lead when it comes to women leaders and people who identify as women and people who identify as men as leaders. Typically, the world and our society believe that men are natural leaders and women are not. And if a woman tends to be a little bit more aggressive or more direct, she's called a very bad word. Where if a man is more direct and aggressive, he's called ambitious, he's called a great leader. So you have to think about all these different things that come into play with our social identities, because it helps you to think about how you lead and how you relate to other people, how you work together, how you build a team, and how you become more effective. So I'm going to bring it right up in a second. All of you would have gotten the workshop, the piece of paper that have to do with the piece of paper that have to do with your identity wheel. So I'm going to bring those up right now. Okay. So all of you would have gotten an identity wheel that looks like this. Can everybody see the identity wheel? So there's two different ones. So I want you to start first at the one at the bottom. I'm going to hold it up, and it has all the different identities. With that, I want you to take your time and answer the 5 questions. So the first one being identities that you think about most often. The second one, identities you think about the least often. Your own identities that you would like to learn more about. Identities that have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself. And identities have the greatest effect on how others perceive you. So I'm going to get everybody about 10 minutes to complete this. So on a separate sheet of paper, if you did not print it out, on a separate sheet of paper, look at the different identities and figure out how that affects you. But I do need you to fill out your identity. So if you don't have the wheel, you can write it down and on a piece of paper, and you can look at ethnicity. You want to fill these in. I'm not going to see these. You're only going to share these if you decide to share them. Okay.
Explain the difference between gender and sex on this.
Gender and sex. So sex is the it could be the sex that you want to be. So gender is the sex is what you were biologically given.
Got you. Thanks.
Okay. Whereas sex could be different. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Starting now is 2:18. You guys have until 2:28 to complete this.
You sent this to us. Was it via email or a text?
Via email.
Can you resend it? I can't find it. Or it's too. I know.
Well, I can't send anything while I'm recording. So okay. That's the difference. So I can make it a little bigger in screen for you all. See if that helps.
Yeah,
a
if you
little
can
bit.
show us, what's on the bottom of it.
Sure, give me 1 second.
Thank you. Also, if you click that arrow sort of like towards the top on the right-hand corner, that will make it a little bit bigger.
Okay. All right. It's 2 sheets of paper together. So the top part, does everybody have that top part? Is religion, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, which means class, gender, sex, sexual orientation, nationality, first language, physical, emotional, developmental disability, age. You're going to fill those all in.
Can you please scroll that back down towards the bottom for a minute?
I sure can.
Thank you.
Marquise, this is Samara. Are these questions based upon our personal or professional life?
Personal.
Personal, okay. All right.
Because typically, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, typically how you see yourself personally is also how you will see yourself
I
professionally.
still didn't get the bottom two.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
So when you think about the identities that you think about the most, it still affects you in your professional life as well.
So do we put the number in the center in each section that we think applies, or?
So you don't number it, you fill it in. So ethnicity, you put in what your ethnicity is. So our example would that be?
Under for identities you think about most often, guys, I just wrote under there. Like
that's fine if you want to do that.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Marcus. I just wanted to know the identities. Are they based on people, like identities you think about most often, as in like family, or your own identities? Example, sex, gender. Is it your own or it's somebody else?
It would be your own.
Okay.
Okay.
Don't forget to mute yourselves, guys.
Please remember to mute yourself, people. Okay, you have 3 minutes left.
Marquise, we can use more than one social identity, right?
Yes. To answer the questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, duh. I guess that's why I say identities. Sorry.
It's okay. Okay. Does anybody else need more time, or are we all done?
I'm good.
I'm good. I'm done.
Okay, perfect. So, as you all have taken the time to fill these out, tell me about this. How did this feel? Were there anything that surprised you about the identities that you think about the most?
No.
No?
I appreciated the fact that you made a distinction between sex and gender.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a more prevalent discussion now than ever before. We have to be respectful of the way that people identify themselves, not necessarily the way that they might have been born. And I've seen
Exactly.
more and more people use the pronouns next to their email signature as the
Mm-hmm.
way that they want to be called.
Exactly. So did anyone want to share any of the answers to their identity questions? You don't have to, but just wanted to see if anybody wanted to share.
The number one, I think about race and first language a lot. My wife is Mexican and bilingual and teaches bilingual.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of discussions about that. So it's kind of prominent in our family.
Okay. Anybody else?
I like that you had disabilities on there because I have several invisible disabilities that obviously require me to go to school online. And to, even though they're invisible, they shouldn't make me feel invisible.
Very true.
Okay, I have something to say. The effect on how others perceive you is not is based on where you are staying also. For example, I'm from India. So in India, people would perceive me different than in USA.
Okay. Perfect. Anybody else?
I
Well,
found
this
a female over 50. Those are the identities I think about most often and gender. I mean, ethnicity in a white male dominated organization that I work.
Okay. Yeah, age is key. A lot of people don't think about age, but we have to think about, unfortunately, in our society and in our country, and just so you all know, these are based on our Western ways. You can definitely apply them to other cultures, but they'll have different ways of meaning, just because of the way our society is set up. But in other cultures, it's a blessing to get old the way you treat your elderly, the way you treat your seniors with respect and kindness and so forth. You don't always see that here in the United States. They're not honored, they're not valued, they're kind of pushed away, pushed in facilities, nursing homes, other people to take care of them. A lot of times disrespected. And then the older you get pushed out of jobs that you've had for a long time, not seen as viable. You're supposed to make way for people who are younger, who are thriving and more ideas. So some of the things with age is key and important.
Well, this is Susan, and I put what I think about most often is my socioeconomic status, my age, my race, and my sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm.
This is Mimi. What I wanted to add with what Marquise was saying, yeah, we push our older adults away while in other cultures, they're seen as the elders and the wise people they go to for advice. And usually those cultures or those communities are seen as a, I don't know, I don't want to add more to it, but say third world country, or they're not the educated ones. Yet they do have a strong hold on the elders to go for advice because they've lived probably more than we have and they have a lot to offer.
Yes, very true. Cool. Anybody else want to share?
Hi, it's Deb Beer. So one of the things that I've become aware of, I had a life change 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And when I'm writing these down, they're this is what people see and that's how they approach you, like, so if your kids, and this wasn't on here, but like if your kids are in their 20s or between 18 and 22, oh, where do they go to college? Well, they don't all go to college. You know what I mean? Like there's those assumptions that you are so aware of, and it frustrates me because my kids are doing exactly what they should be doing, but I'm 52 and it's still a year and a half away from my degree. And so when I say, oh, I'm doing my great degree, they'll be like, oh, you're getting your master's? I'm like, no, like, it's those assumptions. I think when you fill these out, you really see those. Just kind of how maybe I slipped into it, years ago and didn't realize it, that we need to be aware of those.
True. And it's interesting, it's more so in our society than other countries, and like I said, this is based on, as we talk some more about the other workshops that we're going to do, especially the power, privilege, and oppression one, these will come back. We will revisit this. We will go with this in a very much deeper conversation, bringing awareness to different things that other people didn't think about. But it's good that you are all taking the opportunity to kind of think about your identities, how other people see you, what is the most, what we call salient, which is the ones you think about the most, which has the most importance and impact for you, whatever that may be. So the next piece, I'm going to move to the top. And you're probably going to ask yourself, why am I doing this one? And I'm going to break that down for you a little bit. So as you notice, your social identity has all to do about the different identities, the constructs, the categories that our society has built up for us to fit into. This one is more your personal identity. So helping you to get to know yourself a little bit more. And we do this intentionally because in order for you to be able to lead, you have to know who you are to lead other people. You have to know what's important to you. You have to know how you see and view the world, but also it helps you in tune to yourself a little bit more. These questions I'm having you all to fill out, and I'll show the bottom ones in a minute, is important because a lot of times, especially in our society, we don't think about ourselves. We're always thinking about somebody else, how we could do something for other people. We never think about who we are, what we like, what's our favorite thing to do, what we're proud of. You find these, what I found is when I do this workshop, the 3 adjectives to describe yourself, people find this the hardest thing to do because they don't think about themselves. And as a leader, I need you to be able to know who you are, be confident you are, confident in your skill sets and your abilities, so that when the social society pieces come into play, you are full effect and ready to lead others and be conscious and advocates and agents of change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read off what they are. If you don't have the paper, like I said, get a piece of paper again, flip it over, We're going to have you answer these, and then we're going to talk about a few of them. So the first one is favorite music, birth order. So were you the firstborn, secondborn, middle child, youngest, a twin, however that may be, number of siblings, your personal motto. So how do you, what's your personal motto in life? One skill you are proud of, favorite movie, favorite book, favorite food, favorite hobby, favorite color. And then you're going to put in there 3 adjectives that describe yourself, 3 positive adjectives that describe yourself. Okay, I'm going to give you all another, let's say 6 minutes. So it's 2:36. At 2:42, we'll convene back. Questions before we go?
What is between favorite book, favorite color? There's 2 that I can't see.
Favorite book, favorite food, favorite hobby.
Maybe you can zoom in a little bit so that we can see the entire page, like, you know, in view. Go to view and zoom in, maybe. Yeah, zoom. It's 100%. You can make it something less. Yeah, maybe 75 would do. Yeah.
All right. Does that help?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right, folks.
Marcus, I just want to clarify, what is birth order?
Birth order. So were you born first,
Okay.
second, you're a middle child, you're the baby. Okay, you have 2 more minutes. Okay, time is up. All right, everybody. So tell me, how was this? Was this easy or was this difficult?
Easy.
I think this one was harder than the last one.
Yeah, it usually is.
At first, I thought like really easy questions, but halfway in, I was really struggling.
You was halfway and you were struggling. Tell me, what did you struggle with the most?
Anything that had to do with like my favorites, I really struggled. So like anything that was like number of siblings, birth order, like that was pretty easy. I only got 2 adjectives down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anything that was like more directed towards myself, I struggled with.
Okay. Anybody else have the same issue of struggling?
A little bit, but it was kind of like favorite, you know, books, because I like a variety of music. So it was, you know, more of like just trying to pinpoint a very more specific one.
Okay. Anybody else?
Knowing it's safe. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say I had the same favorite issue, like my favorite movie, my favorite book. I don't even know if I have a hobby.
My favorite hobby I put was sleeping, but I found
that's not a hobby. I'm gonna tell
you
right
now,
not
a hobby? You can't use that one? Okay, then I did struggle. I sort of went with what came to mind, otherwise I would have struggled.
Okay. And so
I put relaxing for my hobby. That's not a hobby either. Because I'm always on the go every day.
What are you doing when you're relaxing?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
No, that's not a hobby.
I don't have a hobby then.
Okay. Right. So I did this on purpose because, and I always have you do the social identity one first and then have you do this one second. It's because typically this one is the hardest one for most people because like I said at the beginning of this is most leaders, most people, because we live so many very busy lives and we're always on the go, we never think about ourselves, ever. We're always thinking about somebody else. We're always thinking about something about our families, our friends, getting things done at the job, helping within our communities. We rarely take time for ourselves. So those of you who said sleeping and relaxing are your hobbies, that means you're not doing very good self-care. And as a leader, you need to be doing good self-care. So key thing for us to think about and remember is as a leader, and as part of your identity, you do need to know what are your favorite movies. It's great if you have multiple ones and it's hard for you to choose, that's fine. But if you got to the point where you couldn't pick any or you couldn't remember what it was, that means you're not taking enough time for yourself. So as leaders, I want us to all to think about and to be cognizant about as we lead, we also are leading with ourselves. So our social identities are the things that society has contracted and developed for us in different categories they have put us in, but who are we genuinely as individuals? Those of you who have already attended the Emotional Intelligence Part 1 workshop tells us all the time about understanding our emotions, helping us understand who we are and how we think and how we tick. If you cannot do that as a leader, it's hard for you to lead other people when you don't know who you are, because how are you guiding somebody down a path that you haven't journeyed yourself down? It's fun. Yeah, somebody talks about they knew what their favorites were 20 years ago, but they're struggling to update. That means you're not taking time for yourself. Someone says, I worked and asked me, someone at work asked me this recently, was the last time you had fun? And I said, what a great question. So as leaders, you got to have that balance. Understanding who you are, understanding your identity. You need to know who you are personally. Who are you outside of work, outside of being a mother, outside of being a wife, outside of being a husband, outside of being a son, a daughter, a friend, all of those, a student. You have to have some of these other things that are key and important in your life. If the time and the society that we're in right now does not show us that we need to know who we are and why it's important for us to know who we are going through this health pandemic, I hope you all start to think about how you lead a little bit differently as we continue to move on. Anybody else had some ones that, did anybody have ones that shocked them when you figured out like your
I think I just wanted to make a comment that I feel like we naturally take so much on, and that's probably why we can't really readily identify the things, you know, our favorite books or our favorite hobbies, is because we naturally take so much on, especially if we're working and going to school. And maybe right now is a great example that we're having this pandemic going on, where it's really slowing, you know, for some people, their lives down a lot. And we're able to recognize that maybe we need to address, you know, some of those many things that we have going on, and learning how to say no to certain things. So we do have more time to be able to dedicate to, you know, having hobbies and being, you know, more able to be leaders when we know how to say things.
Very true. And then someone put some key factors up here too. Those of you who are parents talked about how it was really hard when their kids were little and they literally forgot who they were because they were busy taking care of somebody else. And now you're in different stages of your life, you realize that, okay, I need to find me again. And that's key and that's important as you lead and as you know who you are and as you develop in your social identities, these things come into play, because as we start to get into the nitty gritty, as we move forward in the workshop, we start to think about the next pieces of how people see you. How do you see yourself? How do people describe you? And we're going to talk about some of those things and how they really relate and fit to your social identities, but also how it helps you to lead other people. Any other questions?
Hey, Marquise, this is Wanda. Hey, everybody. I like that you brought this up, because these are things that, like you said, we don't think about, but it's always good to visually see it like we're seeing now. It also helps us to reset ourselves. It gives us something to think about, again, since we're stuck at homebound. You know, it gives us an option to think about things that we don't normally think about, being so busy with the kids and life in general. So this is a really good point. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're going to get back to the presentation. Okay, so now that we've had this conversation about what was our most salient, which is what identities resonate with us that we think about all the time, we talked about perception of others and some of those identities and so forth, and then we had the time to reflect on, like, what is our personal identity? Like, who am I? What do I like to do? How do I define myself outside of these different categories that society has placed upon me? So now we're going to dive a little bit deeper. Now we're going to dive a little bit deeper and do a different activity. So I'm going to ask everybody to take out 2 sheets of paper. And typically, if we were in person, I would have told you all, I would have gave everybody a paper bag, and I would have gave you about 10 index cards. But since we're via Zoom, this is how we're going to do it. So what you're going to do is, so your piece of paper, I want you to imagine it's a paper bag. On the outside of your paper bag, you're going to identify 5 things that people, when they first meet you, think about you. They don't know your name, but let's say you're walking down the street. So let's say, hi, I'm Marquise. You guys have never met me. You see me walking down the street. What are 5 things that you automatically think about me? But I want you to think about social identities as they come into play. So what are the first things that people think about you just by looking at you? So here's a couple questions to guide you guys. So labeling your bag, how do people perceive you at first glance? Just by looking at you. That's the first question we're going to answer. And you're going to write it, which would be on the outside of your bag.
I don't know.
Okay, who needs more time? Are we all done?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
That's done.
Perfect. All right. Now that you have labeled your outside of your bag, how people perceive you at first glance, the next thing I want you to do is we're going to go to the next set of questions and then we're going to discuss. So, On the inside of your bag, so flip your paper over, I want you to write down 2 or 3 personal experiences that define you, or stories your closest friends, family, and members would know about you.
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. So on the other side of your paper, you're going to write down 2 to 3 experiences, lived experiences that you have to define who you are as a person. And then you can write quick, notes to keep yourself apprised of what the story is. What would your closest friends and family members say about you? Know about you that other people off the street would know about you. So the first part was people who didn't know you, what their first impressions of you were. And now these are how you define yourself, your lived experiences, how you define yourself, and how the people's closest to you would define you and know things about you that other people wouldn't know. And I know this one may take a little bit longer, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes. It's 2:57. So at 3:07.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
When you say that has the personal experience or lived experiences that defines you, that sounds so absolute.
Right. I want you to think about, there are certain things, lived experiences that you've had in your life that define who you are. The way you think, the way you breathe, the way you interact with people, the way you handle things, the way you solve problems. It's certain specific things that have happened to you in your life that you lived through, that you achieved, that you persevered through, that helped you to be who you are today.
Marquise, could you also say things that help to define you?
Yep.
Okay.
You could be still striving to that, but you could be in the process of doing that too.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Marquise, you only want us to write down 3 or 5, or as many as we could think about?
I mean, if you have more that you want to share, you can, but I'm just telling you that I want you to do 2 to 3.
Okay.
If you have more that have defined you, you can add those.
All right.
Okay. Okay, we got 2 minutes left. Okay, we got 1 minute left. Okay, it is time. So let's go all the way back to the first question. Who wants to talk about when people first perceive you, people who don't know you at first glance? What are they saying about you? What do you think they're saying about you?
I'm a young Black American male.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I look very young, so they might think that I'm single. And of course, I'm from Venezuela, so I'm Latino. And I don't know, I might be educated.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Marquise.
Go
this
ahead.
was hard. I couldn't answer that question. I really couldn't because I am unsure of what a person's perception is of me. I know that once a person do get the chance to know me, they know that I'm very down to earth, funny, just, cool. So I couldn't answer what the perception was at first.
Okay. Well, Samira, I want to challenge you. I'm going to. So first thing is you're a woman, you're female, you're African American. You have a disability because you wear glasses. Yes, all those things.
OMG. Okay.
And I can't really tell about, I can't look and see what you got on, but depending on what you got on, depending on what you got on can determine if I think that you are low socioeconomic, middle class, or high. So
yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
This is Erin McGuire.
Anybody else want to go next?
Yeah, this is Sarah. So my situation's a little bit different in that what people see for me is my choice. I have piercings, I have tattoos, my hair is black. So I think what I put forth, maybe initially people are not going to think that I'm as educated as I am or able as I am. And then once we get talking and they realize that I'm still, you know, despite that stuff, despite what I choose to put forward, there are still qualities that they also value.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Anybody else?
Now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I could kind of relate with her. I have tattoos and my ears are gay, so a lot of times they don't think that I'm a classroom teacher, and I know I've actually had a few people think that I'm younger than what I am. And when I'm with my child, a lot of times I get a lot of attitude from people because they think I'm a younger mom. So many times when I try to like talk to them about certain situations or certain topics that have to do with like my son's schoolwork, they kind of dismiss me until they realize that I'm older and I work at a school, and then they somewhat start valuing my opinion.
I've been there.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing too.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence because when people see me, they think I'm mean. And that's because I don't wear a smile on my face. So they think I'm mean, they think I'm bothered, or either they think I'm sad. But my last 4 and 5 was because when they get to know me, they know that I am nice and friendly.
Okay.
Okay, when people get to see me at first glance, they know my gender, female, age, voice intonation, the way I speak, and my status, maybe by the clothes I wear.
Okay. Perfect. Anybody else want to go?
I have I'm a professional. I work full time, and so Monday through Friday I get dressed up and go to work and put on makeup. My weekends are no makeup and stretchy pants days, and so that's often if I need to buy clothing or go to a store, I will go, and I find that, or I believe that if I look like I'm not fashionable, I don't get attention from the store clerks. Like I have money, I want to buy something, and I'm really, when I go, because I hate shopping, I'm ready to buy, but I don't get help, and often I leave with nothing.
Okay, you bring up something phenomenal. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Keep going. Who else wants to go next?
It's Deb. And when you said about the wearing glasses, I didn't even consider it. I've worn them since grammar school, but it's a disability. And that like really went, oh, like that wasn't ever something that I considered as that, you know?
I put down how I speak, my facial expression. And sometimes they think I'm more educated than I am. The next aspect is that they think I'm way younger than I am, middle 40s, and people still think I'm maybe middle 30, in my middle 30s, which I'm not. So sometimes they give me that kind of, what are you talking about? Look. And I'm like, and they're like, do you have kids? And I said, yes, 3. One almost in 12th grade. And they're like, huh? How old are you? And then I'm like, okay. Then I was like 43. I said, I'll be 44 soon. Now I'm 44. And they look like, no, you're not. I'm like, do you want to see my ID? You know? So I'm from the island. I'm a Jamaican, you know, Black girl. So yeah, I get that. My accent is very distinct. Sorry. So it's, yeah. So I kind of get that. And sometimes at first they see me, and if I'm not smiling, everyone just think I'm mad. And I kind of hate that because I'm not mad. It's just my countenance. But then when I smile, then they're like, oh my God. So I don't know.
Trust me, I've been there. I'm gonna. Before we end, I'll have you all assess how old you think I am. What are your preferences over me, and we'll see how many people are actually right and how many people are way off the mark. Okay. Anybody else want to share?
I was gonna say, this is Mimi. I was gonna say that the first glance depends on what group is you're looking at for first glance. So if I'm surrounded by Latino people, I am a Latina Mexican, so yes, I look younger than what I am, but then they don't know if they'll question if I'm married or have children, because apparently Latinos, we get married very young. And then they also sometimes assume that I'm Spanish. So
okay.
I'm speaking in Spanish, they're like, wow, you speak it very well. As I have friends that speak only English, and they're like, you speak English very well. I'm like, what do you mean by that? So I've had to deal with it on both sides sometimes. And then if I'm in the Latino group, they do assume I'm educated, which I am. But if I'm surrounded by multicultural people, I guess, they don't know, like they'll question the educated part sometimes as well. Yeah. So it all depends on what the group I'm in and whose first glance it is.
Interesting. Let's talk about one of the things you mentioned in the next workshop coming up. Anybody else want to share before we move on?
I will.
Okay.
I have, this is Susan. I have dreadlocks. And with all of the, I would say, bias towards people who have dreadlocks. I think people are at first a little standoffish from me, or they assume that I smoke a lot of weed. I'm 60. I'll be 63 years old this year.
Okay.
And so they look at my age. You know, I'm always in a position where I'm always around a lot of people that are younger than me. So they look at my age, and then they also look at my gender. Because I am a female, I think most of the time people are kind of shocked because they make these assumptions. I think they assume that I'm not an intelligent person too, because of the fact that I wear dreadlocks. Or because of the fact that I'm African American. I'm also disabled, visibly disabled. I also wear glasses. You know, that's not my disability. However, I'm visibly disabled, and I don't know. I think people kind of are standoffish, or I don't see them. There used to be a time where people used to be helpful towards others who were disabled, but I see now the trend is to disregard you as an older person and as a disabled person. People aren't very nice. So
yeah. Okay, we have a few people in the chat. Let me get those real quick. But so the reason why I brought these things up is a couple things, because I want us to think about these questions, and then soon we'll be getting ready to wrap up. So I want us to think about, when we start to think about the outside of our bag. So those are the things that people see without really knowing us. The inside of our bag are the things that people know about us personally, who we are, what we think, what we're passionate about, whether we're kind, whether we're thoughtful, whether we're generous, whether we help others in our community, whether we're funny, whether we have a strong faith, all those different things. And I want us to start to think about the different things society has put on, constructs that they have put on us, and think about the question I'm going to ask you all, and I want you to just say, what do you think it is? Is the American dream rooted in a sense of identity that is formed by the inside or the outside of the bag?
Outside.
I say outside as well.
Definitely outside until they get to know the inside.
Definitely
outside.
Perfect.
Outside.
I'm glad you all say that, because I want us to start to think about how you think about identities and how other people think of you, and how you get to transform how you think about other people. Because I love it. The old saying with the American dream is pull up, what does it says? Pull up by your bootstraps. I'm a self-made person. And I always laugh at this saying, because when we start to talk about power, privilege, and oppression, we're going to break that down a little bit, because my philosophy is, if I wanted to achieve the American dream by the way that people look at me, African-American woman, they may or may not think that I'm educated, all those other different pieces. I always keep talking about, well, with the American dream, it's like, oh, you can do this on your own. Well, when we start to talk about power, privilege, and oppression, we all know that's not quite true, because there's different roadblocks, different societal structures in place that help others to succeed, where others have to work twice as hard to get to the bare minimum. And so I always like to say, when they talk about the American dream, put on your bootstraps, pull on your boots and play your bootstraps, I said, some of us actually got boots to pull up. Some people never started with boots. So I want us to think about, as we think about social identities, the many different inequalities across the board. So whether you find yourself, if it's gender, whether it's sexuality, whether it's religion, whether it's language, even beyond race, disability, I want you to all think about some way, shape, or form. There were certain things that people say it's not normal. That's not the norm. Then the other piece I want us to think about is your identity, your leadership identity. Is that rooted inside the box or outside the box?
Now that's definitely inside.
Definitely inside.
I agree.
Well, I can also say it's from
Yeah,
the
no,
outside, because when people perceive you, and especially when you're given a job and you're promoted, so your outside face, might give you a promotion, than if you're an introvert or something like that. It can be inside and outside both. That's my point.
Yeah, it could be inside and outside. Anybody else have some more comments on that one? So I want us to think about, go ahead. Somebody have a comment?
I was going to say, if you're being hired, outside plays a bigger key, and hopefully on the inside, if you're being promoted from within the company, because they've gotten time to get to know you more than just your outside appearance. Of course, that's not totally true, but you would like it to be
true.
True.
What I was going to say is, I want us to start to think about, how do we make sure that both things help to blend the two, that our leadership identity is really based on, and we have it based on what's inside the bag instead of outside the bag. Can someone please move their phone? Thanks. That we have it focused on more what's on the inside of the bag than what's on the outside of the bag. Because the reason why I say that is because on the outside of the bag, for me, because I'm a woman, someone may think that I am not capable of being a leader, but I can have phenomenal leadership skills that can take the next generation to the next level and make a multi-million-dollar company. So I want us to think about these different things as how we look at others, how we perceive others, how we start to work together in teams, that when we first meet people, that we don't go off of our first impressions. We give ourselves the opportunity to get to know the person. So if they have a hard look, or if they don't smile a lot, or they are introverts, that doesn't mean they're not a dynamic person on the team. That doesn't mean that they won't bring something to the table. Doesn't mean that they're not full of ideas and creativity. They just may need more time to think, more time to process. Those of you who've already done Strengths Quest with me know I talk about the different strengths that you bring to the table is how you thrive and how you grow, and how you're able to delegate different ideas to other people. Those of you who haven't taken it yet, you'll take it in the next week or so, and this will all start to make a little bit more sense to you. But I want us to really think about how to making sure that as we lead other people and as we build our leadership skills, that we want it to always be what we bring to the table from the inside, not the way people perceive us. And then the next question just kind of gives us thinking. I want us to think about, like, as we talk about what are the things, are things like our justice system, school education systems, our media, are those things based or informed by the inside of the bag or the outside of the bag?
Outside.
Yeah, I believe that outside too.
Definitely outside.
Okay. And so how do we become those agent of change to make it so that things are not based on the outside of the bag, but things are based on what's on the inside of the bag?
You said how do we?
How?
By
I mean,
being an example, a living example.
Being a living example, true. Anybody else?
How about getting involved in one of those groups and get in there and be the change that needs to be made so that you can start choosing people based on their inside versus the outside.
Okay, perfect. Anyone else?
Be the leader within your family to start driving that change. You know, educating close family and relatives, you know, when they're not looking at that more than the outside appearance.
Sure. Anybody else?
I love that statement. And I also think that it is important for us to have conversations that take us outside of our comfort levels so that we can understand each other's outside of their bags, so to speak, and help to change perceptions.
I love that. That's great.
I think advocating for people, especially people who have trouble advocating for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's key. And my number one thing is, we'll talk a lot about this in the next workshop. Speaking up, you all, that's going to be key. You know, speaking up, when you see things, say it. It may be that hard, difficult conversation you may have to have with a family member or a friend or a colleague. Sometimes it may be your boss or the president of the company. You might have to be, can I ask that question? Just because the more that we get people to really think about their social identities and how they play within our world and how things are constructed, the better that we are able to see the inside of the bag of someone else, instead of just looking at what's on the outside of the bag, and helping us to be able to speak and be that change that we want to see. If we want to see different change in our judicial systems, we have to make sure that we're doing the things that make that happen, making sure we're voting in the right folks and all those different changes and so forth. So I think it's key and important for all of us to, as we talk about having assumptions and stereotypes and developing our own biases and ideas around who we think people are, taking that step back and say, let's get to know that person. Let's see what they bring to the table, what they get to do, because it helps you to be able to lead. And I'll give a really good example about this. In one of the workshops that we did recently, there was a manager who said he had two individuals that identified as women. And one of the other ladies said to the other lady, she said, "Oh, you have what did she say? She complimented her shape, her body shape." And the other person took it as offense and said, "What do you mean?" So she went to the manager and said basically the person was being discriminatory toward her because she complimented, I think it was her legs or something like that. And she was saying that in her culture, the way she views things, that people will consider her to be overweight. And the other person thought that they had a beautiful shape. And so, and I bring those different things up is because I want us to be able to see that we see things in different views in different ways. And because of our cultures and because of our backgrounds and because of our identities, we may not always see the same thing through the same lens, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we need to take that time to step back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be offensive. Actually, I was trying to give you a compliment. And then two, to think about how do we be able to, as you all did your workshop with Jordan earlier this week around conflict resolution, how do we start to think about how when you look at people's identities and how society has formed the way that they've been told how they think, how they should look, how they should behave, what's the right form, what's the right box to be in, how that really affects the way people make judgment decisions, life decisions, the way they may deal with their anger or frustration, the way they may see something from a different viewpoint than you may not see it. But as a leader, we have to take all those different viewpoints in and be able to say, okay, so-and-so, what is the root? So you're having a conflict or you're having an issue with Molly or whatever the case may be. What is this stemming from? Because it's more than they looked at you wrong. It's a combination of things. But we have to be able to step back and be as leaders to know who we are, understand the different social identities, and understand that people are coming in with different pieces and people are looking at them in a different perception, a different lens than we may look at someone else. And when you do that, you can kind of break some things down and get to the root of all problems. And we talked about in the last questions is we've all been there when we've labeled someone, how we've labeled, have you been listed, how it says, how have you been labeled, and explain how it has affected you. So has anybody had an experience where off the bat, someone thought you were one thing and it had them treating you in a different way? And then as soon as they got to know you, they confided, oh, I thought you were so-and-so, so-and-so. And once I got to know you, you were a very different person, and they kind of apologized. Has anybody had that experience?
All the time. Tanya.
Yes, always.
I had this situation a lot when I started working for Chicago Public Schools. I originally started working with 7th and 8th grade, and a lot of the teachers kind of took me as very naive since I was young.
Mm-hmm.
But once I was working with the kids and I had a very strong structure and a very routined environment with the kids, they were like, oh, I'm so surprised that you could even handle them. So I know I saw that a lot. And even now that I'm working with younger kids on my degree, I still get that because they all think I'm much younger, and sometimes they even think I just don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and it doesn't make you feel real good, does it?
No, of course not, because especially when I would be working with the classroom teachers and I would give them some opinions or some ideas that might work, and they would just brush you off, it kind of makes, or at least for me, it made me feel like, are my strategies smart enough? Am I smart enough?
Yeah.
Right. So in those situations, you end up second guessing your own abilities because you study and constantly have to prove who you are because you know who you are. And sometimes people know who you are, but because of their pride or their so-called, and I'm doing the quote fingers, power, that they try to make you feel like you're less than because it gives them more power, so to speak. So in the sense of you always have to prove who you are, that goes back to our social identity. Who are we as leaders that we can lead people that we have been assigned to lead? Like, you didn't just get the job because of your looks. It has to be an ability that the person who hired you have seen in you and have trust in you that you will hold up to what your resume and your education simplifies about you.
Right. And thank you for that comment. And that's what I want us to really think about as we move forward for the next pieces. And so things for us to think about our social identities and how they can affect how your social affect things in your life. So think about like how we are in our internships, how we lead and be mentors if we're mentoring other people, in our education, in the classrooms, how we're being treated, employee opportunities, relationships, all those different things our social identity has an impact on. And so I want us to always to remember, because everybody's coming to the table with so many different other things, as important as us as leaders to, that's why I had you to figure out, who are you? What's your favorite thing? What's your favorite book? What's your life motto? what are 3 things that you define about yourself that are good attributes? Because you're going to encounter many people who are going to look at the things on the outside of the bag and make different reservations about who they think you are until they get the opportunity to get to know you. And as leaders, you have to be confident in yourself, because there's going to be times where you're going to have to encourage yourself. There may not be anyone else around to encourage you or tell you that you did a good job or that you did well. And you have to think about, how do I set the example for the people that you ultimately will lead? All of you all will be in some type of leadership position at some point in time in your life. So how do you turn the negative experience that you had where people didn't quite looked at you only face value and not what you brought to the table? How do you in turn do that for someone else in the team that you will lead, so that you are setting the example, so that you are making that change within society? Okay. Questions. I know this one was a lot of talking and thinking and reflecting. Does anybody have any questions or any last thoughts that they would like to talk about?
I would like for you to go over a personal motto, I think it was.
So personal motto, I'll give you an example of mine. My personal motto is, I'm always striving for the best.
Okay.
So, and I say that because I told you I was going to give you guys the opportunity to we have a few minutes. So off the top of your head, just by looking at me and interacting with me today, what do you think what are the things that you would say about me just by looking at me? And think about our social identities.
Oh. She's well educated, well spoken.
Female, Black, intelligent, friendly, helpful.
Yes.
Very knowledgeable.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to tell you what other people have thought. For instance, I have 4 children. They're all, my youngest is 17 years old.
Mm. I knew you were in your early 40s.
The age thing, those people out here with age.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing, I'm a grandmother. I have 3 grandchildren.
I would have never guessed that.
Me
neither.
Hey, that's the best job to have, though.
It is. It is the best job.
I would have never guessed.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is I was in a situation with my oldest son, who's now, he'll be 19 in June. He had an IEP, and I was the person who went to all the meetings and so forth and advocated for my son. And the first time I sat at the table down with the teachers, the psychologists, and the social workers, they started to explain to me as if I was a 3rd grader about what they thought, so I can understand his issues and his problems he was having educationally. And I flipped it on his head, and I turned around and said, okay, well, what about this? And what are you doing about this? And when is he being mainstream? And what are you doing? And so when they went through and they looked at me and they go, I said, oh, I'm sorry, did I tell you I was getting my master's in education? And I did and I said, oh, and I did a couple interns in special ed. And then they looked at me and they was like, oh, completely different conversation. Because they thought I was going to be that parent that was going to come in and say, nothing's wrong with my child. I was going to be combative, that they had to educate me, that I didn't know what I was talking about, and I didn't know how to best advocate for my child. When I came in and showed them
that
I
as
know
well.
the language, right. So they looked at my social identity as an African-American woman and thought I was uneducated and needed to be taught, instead of talking to me as a parent to figure out what was the best way we as a team could help my child. And there are many times I would advocate for stuff for my child that they didn't even think about, because I knew my child better than they knew my child. So, which helped him to be extremely successful, and he's thriving and doing well now. He's he's finishing up his first year of college, getting straight A's. But we're talking about a child that they labeled to be a behavior problem to a child that has done leaps and bounds. So I say all of this is because people have made that assumption about who they thought I was, help to change, for me to be able to change and not have the same perception about them and say, this is what I need us to be able to do to work together to help my child. And so I want us to think about how we do the same thing for other people. How do we turn around and turn the thing on its head? So when you have people that are going to question you, when you have people who are going to look at you differently, who have people that are going to ask those dumb questions and say stupid things to you and say things to you that doesn't build you up but tear you down, how do you know that you know who you are? It's about being confident. It's about being secure. It's about knowing that you have the abilities and the skills to do the job and do the task. And how do you, in turn, ask those questions to say, hey, okay, I know you said this, and that, the other, and then you flip it on his head and go, well, shoot off all the high quality educational questions where you just blew their mind. So now they completely have a different perspective, but you're still confident in who you are. You didn't take it to heart. You didn't take it personally. And then you learned you taught them a lesson how for them not to make a judgment about others. And then you're teaching other people the next time that when you encounter someone you don't quite know who they are, what's on the inside of their bag, you take that step back to ask probing questions to get to know them better.
Or Marquise, did you go in there and teach them their job?
No, I did not go in to teach them a job, but we end up having a phenomenal working relationship at the end of the process.
That's wonderful.
and like I said, my child thrived from it, and then they actually took some of my ideas and
that's right
for some other children. But the key factor of it is, if I would have let that one thing of them thinking of who they thought I was by looking at me, get me angered, get me frustrated, get me to the point where I was in fear or doubting myself, I never would have had the benefit of being able to lead them in the right way to teach my child. And so the key factor in every situation, like I said, that was just a personal situation I had with my son and his teachers and that team, but they learned differently how to treat people because of the interactions with me. They learned to have a little bit more patience, a little bit more grace, and not make assumptions on who they think they're working with, and realize that they can have an enjoyable, teachable moment with someone who looks like me.
And that's true, because funny enough, I had the same experience last summer with my child getting him on IEP. Yeah, they tend to try to talk down to you like you have no knowledge of what they're about to explain. So yeah.
So as leaders, it's a hard job, but it's a job that if we take our time to think, calm down, relax, think about the other person, go beyond of what we see, get to know the person so that we can pull out those great qualities within them, and then be able to work with that to lead a great team, we'll be successful in doing so. Okay, any other questions?
I do kind of have a question about what you're saying about sitting down for the first time in the IEP team. So right now I'm a para in a self-contained classroom, and I'm going for my degree in that. So like, how do you respectfully ask, because we have a lot of parents who this is their first experience, their kids coming in at 3, you know, pediatrician recommended or whatever. Some of them have come from moved from other countries in the recent years. How do you respectfully ask someone or gauge or know what they know? Do you know what I mean? So they're not making an assumption. Like, how do you initiate that conversation?
Well, first ask them about their child. Let's first ask them, tell me a little bit about your child. I know that the doctor recommended, or things may be recommended to you, but ask me, what are some of the things you saw at home? Have you noticed them having difficulties? What are some of your concerns? The key factor is you always want to make sure that when you're having these conversations, you want to humanize it. They're human beings, they're people. And so for you to assume that they're ignorant is rude and very disrespectful. Just like any other leadership role that you're in, think about when it's a student, think about on your job, if someone makes the assumption that they don't think you know what you're talking about because of any one of your social identities, that really hurts and affects the relationship. it makes it difficult either if people are going to cut themselves off or people are going to be open to listen. So if you want the relationship as a leader to always be open for people to hear you and you to hear them and be respectful and have this back and forth dialogue and develop this place of respect and of encouragement and the place of thriving, you always want to start with questions. I know Jordan talked about like the I statements, and Jordan talked about Laura for conflict resolution, but these are key. You want to make sure that you're always listening with your body, listening with your ears, asking the right questions, following up with questions, finding out what they do know. And you just, you know, instead of insulting someone and saying, well, you don't know about this, that, and the other, ask them, are you familiar with this process? Before we go into talk about steps 3 through 20, for all the different language and paperwork, you know, find out what they do for a living. Do they work in the education system? Because they may let you know that they know something, or they may have a family member that works in the education system and they've already did that consult before coming to you. So you just want to ask a lot of questions about the parent and say, tell me a little bit more about you and your child. What do you understand about this process? What you don't know? Because they'll tell you, I don't know anything about this process. They'll be very upfront with you about what they don't know, but for you to assume that they don't is where the disconnect can happen.
I could also add something to that. I've been a classroom teacher for 14 years. I think that the positive element of things often is also left out of these conversations. And you have to remember, when a parent walks through the doors, they're the expert on their child. They're the only person in the room that has known that child for their whole lives. They know what works and they know what doesn't. So asking them, you know, in this type of situation at home, what have you found to be successful? They really always have a lot to offer. And you're completely right. Sometimes it may be a frustrating situation where they're, you know, at their wit's end, you just don't know. But that also, entering on an element of positivity, opens up the conversation and kind of brings everybody's walls down so that they're more receptive to the conversation in general, wherever it's going to go.
And I would say be careful the other way, because I'm highly educated and my kids, 3 of them had IEPs, and I don't know anything about IEPs. I didn't at the time. I researched, you know, as much as I could find, but it, you know, it's very complex. And so assuming that I know it also leaves you out of the conversation as well. Now, I'm very blunt and forward, so I'm happy to pipe in, but there's a lot of people who just won't ask questions, and they'll just go on walking out of there not understanding because they're not one to stand up and go, you know what, I don't know something. So that's an opposite way of, you know, people assuming you know what's going on rather than not knowing. But either way can be, you can feel alienated if they treat you.
I think kind of going off what he just said too is kind of reading their body language and facial expressions. You'll be able to tell whether they're understanding or not for the most part. And I think sometimes those meetings can be really intimidating for parents, and they don't want to be the ones that say, hey, I don't understand that. Can you go back and explain it? So I know I've always followed up. I work in assistive technology. So it's a lot of technology stuff, apps, computers, those kind of things. So following up after the meeting, either one-on-one or with an email, just to clarify that everything is understood.
Perfect.
Okay. And I found ask, like you said, people aren't offended if you ask if they know or not. It's when you make the assumption they know or not that really is what I think causes the communication to start off badly.
True.
And I would just like to add to what you guys are talking about, and it's about the presentation as well. It's just about how you present the information, your tone, your facial expressions. I mean, whether the person is familiar with the topic or not, this is still your field. This is still your job. You're still educated about whatever, you know, to the parent. So it's all about the presentation and how you present things, because it's already a sensitive topic anyway regarding IEPs. So if you go in, you know, as the educator and start with the positives and then work your way to, you know, the situation at hand, then I think it would have a better a better effect on the parent, on the receiver.
Sure.
I think even changing the language you use, like instead of saying, you know, these are the things they have difficulties with, that sounds very negative. So saying something like the things they're still working on, or things that they're improving. So kind of using your language to help make it seem more positive instead of so negative.
Sure. But it's interesting that all the things you were talking about when we're talking about IEPs is the same thing you do as leaders. Just think about when you're supervising someone, when you're thinking about when you are helping two people that you supervise are in conflict, you always start with the positives. You start with ways to encourage them. You don't start with the negative. You try to get to understand them and see what's going on and how they're thriving to make things work. And so as you notice that, you'll notice as you go through all the different workshops, they're building upon each other, developing a skill for you and putting different pieces together. So some of the things I'm talking about now are some of the things you all learned when you talked with Jordan. And so you see in some of the basic pieces that you're learning and thriving, and you're building upon these different levels of skills levels, even this. So in your social identity, you didn't think how conflict resolution was going to help, but you see how all these different things they're stepping stones together to build you into a strong leader. So as we are getting close to the end of our time, I wanted to first thank everybody for taking the time out and sitting for the workshop. Hopefully you have enjoyed them so far. There's many more to come. They're all fun and different and engaging in their own different way and have interactive activities. I'm going to stop the record now, and anybody who did not